hard to think of an industry that yields more influence than that of big oil. In fact, Bush's former speechwriter just came out and admitted that oil was a major motivating factor for the invasion of Iraq. I know, hardly a shocker there. But while oil may be an influential feature of U.S. foreign policy, the fossil fuel industry also enormously impacts domestic policy and the media narrative. It's a subject my next guest has tackled throughout his entire career, while exposing some of the biggest oil corporations from the U.S. to Venezuela and everywhere in between. He's a close friend of late Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez, investigative journalist and author of many books, including the last one, Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, How to Steal an Election in 9 Easy Steps. Greg Palast, thanks so much for joining me.
Glad to be here, Abby.
So you spent a lot of time with Hugo Chavez. When he died, he was vilified by the U.S. government and the media alike. But as you've pointed out, this wasn't always the case. So what was the turning point for when he evolved into U.S. public enemy #1?
Well, shock, it's the oil. Chavez back in 2000 to 2001 decided that he wasn't going to give it away anymore. Oil had been selling for about $15 a barrel. When it went up, he said, you're going to have to pay for it. The big U.S. oil companies are paying a royalty for Venezuela's super heavy oil of about 1%. 1%, okay? And for the regular oil, the heavy oil, was 16%. So the oil companies are keeping 84%, and Chavez said, you're going to have to pay 30%. You can only keep 70% of our oil, which is now $100 a barrel, right? You can only keep $70 a barrel. You got to split off a bit to the people of Venezuela. And of course, that made him enemy #1, not to Americans, but to America's landlords, the oil companies.
And, you know, as we know already about the economic hitman's role and the jackals and how kind of the world is structured in that sense and the corporatocracy in which we live, I mean, Chavez once asked you why the U.S. elite wanted him dead, why they wanted to kill him. Did he believe that the U.S. was trying to actively assassinate him for a while?
Actually, they did, and I was a BBC reporter, I am a BBC reporter, covering Chavez, and we had a lot of inside information on the various assassination attempts. And the U.S. Obviously supported the coup d'etat. The president of Venezuela, Chavez, who was elected, was kidnapped by the Chamber of Commerce chief, a guy named Carmona. Talk about a corporate takeover, a violent corporate takeover, and he was released. But the U.S. ambassador came down and had his photo taken with the guys who had kidnapped the president of Venezuela. So you can imagine how that played in Venezuela. Yeah, so the U.S. was continually trying to kill him. And in fact, Chavez sent to my office in New York his vice president, Nicolas Maduro, who is now running to take Chavez's place as president, he's acting president, to go over the evidence that they had and share with me and the BBC team the evidence we had about endless attempts to get rid of Chavez. They thought a bullet would reduce their taxes. That's one way to take a tax cut.
And of course, in the wake of his death, Greg, we're seeing think tanks going crazy. I mean, just recently, the American Enterprise Institute drafted a post-Chavez checklist for American policymakers recommending the U.S. to move quickly to reorganize the country. I mean, in your perspective, what are U.S. interests doing to seize upon Venezuela in the wake of his death?
Well, think of it this way. You had Pat Robertson, the televangelist, who is, I know him, and he said, you know, I'm a businessman. He's deeply involved in Venezuelan investments. He's a billionaire. And he said, you know, Hugo Chavez thinks they're trying to assassinate him, and I think we should just go ahead and do it. You just send out a team of commandos, cheaper than a $200 billion war. Because as far as Pat Robertson and his buck buddies, the Koch brothers, Exxon, Chevron, etc., the Venezuelans are sitting on their oil. It's not Venezuela's oil, and that's the ultimate concern. Is that Venezuela now has 5 times the reserve of Saudi Arabia. If you look at the U.S. Energy Department, tags Venezuela as the largest oil state on the planet, and of course, what are the Venezuelans doing on our oil?
Yeah, I like the connection that you made between the Koch brothers, Venezuela, and the Keystone Pipeline, of course. But Greg,